My name is John. I'm 23 and I work at a 24/7 bar in my town, a place known for its pizza and drinks. We don't offer much else on the menu, but people seem to enjoy it anyway. I never really understood why the owners decided to start offering delivery. It's a hassle for probably not much extra money. But since we don't get many delivery orders, I was always the only driver during the 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift. On this particular night, the bar was pretty crowded. There were several large groups, and with deliveries being slow, I was helping out by waiting tables. A few deliveries came in, one every hour or so, and at 3 a.m. there was another regular delivery for me to drop off. I grabbed the pizza, got in my car, and set out. The address was about 15 minutes away, so I typed it into Google Maps and started driving. Up until this point, everything was completely normal. This was just another delivery, just another night. Honestly, I was relieved to get out of the crowded bar and onto the quiet roads. But then, something unexpected happened. My Google Maps suddenly announced that I had arrived. I wasn't even in a neighborhood. I pulled over onto the curb, trying to figure out where I'd gone wrong. I double-checked the address. It was the correct one, but there were no houses nearby, just the entrance to what looked like a forest preserve or park. There was nothing around that could have been mistaken for an actual residence. Confused, I decided to call the customer. The phone rang for barely a second before the guy picked up. "Hey, this is John. I'm trying to deliver your pizza, but I think you've given us the wrong address," I said, my voice tinged with confusion. There was an unnervingly long pause on the other end. I could hear the man breathing heavily, almost deliberately. Then, without a word, he described my car and instructed me to look to my left. I glanced over, and there, in the pitch-black darkness of the forest, I saw movement. Something, or rather, someone, was waving their arms to get my attention. It was him. He was standing in the woods, behind the road. My heart raced as I tried to make sense of it. Why wasn't he on the road? Why order a pizza to a place like this? Against my better judgment, I got out of the car and started walking toward him. The silence around me was suffocating. The air felt thick, and the stillness of the night unnerved me. There were no cars, no people. Just me, the forest, and the uneasy sense that something was off. I was about halfway to the man when I realized something even stranger. He didn't move. He didn't come to meet me, didn't move closer to make the exchange easier. He just stood there, watching me, his figure barely visible in the shadows. I stopped, suddenly feeling the weight of the situation. This was getting weird. I waved at him, gesturing for him to come closer, to take the pizza and pay for it. The man hesitated. Instead of walking up, he looked over my shoulder, glancing behind me and to either side. His eyes scanning the area, clearly looking for any witnesses. My nerves were shot by now, making it harder to think straight. My gut was screaming at me to get back to the car, to leave before things escalated. But before I could react, the man started moving toward me, and fast. I stumbled back, but it was too late. He grabbed my arm with surprising strength, pulling me toward the forest. He wasn't shouting, but there was an intensity to his grip that told me he wasn't messing around. He was trying to drag me into the woods. We struggled back and forth for several long seconds. I could feel the panic rising in my chest. Couldn't break free. My mind raced. What if I didn't get away? What if there were more people hiding in the trees? I swung my fist, landing a few clean punches to his face. His grip loosened, and I broke free, but I wasn't safe yet. I turned and bolted for my car, adrenaline fueling my legs. I dared to look back, just for a second, and that's when I saw him. He was getting up, quickly. And then, to my horror, 2 more men emerged from the trees. They had been waiting, hidden, watching it all unfold. I jumped into my car, my hands shaking as I slammed the door shut. I didn't look back as I sped off, my mind racing. I didn't even hesitate. I drove straight to the police station, just a block away. By the time I got there, the men had vanished. Of course, they weren't there. No sign of them, no trace of what had happened. I told the police everything, hoping for some kind of resolution, but they didn't find anything. No evidence, no clues. They couldn't even trace the guy's phone number. It had already been disconnected. The first name he gave me? Most likely fake. Later, I went back to the bar. I explained everything to my boss, who seemed genuinely concerned, but he didn't have any answers. He just sent me home early, handing me a free slice of pizza, hardly a fair trade for what had happened. Looking back, I realized how close I had come to something far worse. If I'd been foolish enough to walk deeper into the woods, I might not have gotten away. They could have jumped me, and with no one around to witness it, I might have disappeared without a trace. My hesitation, my instinct to stay cautious, had saved me. But next time, I knew I wouldn't take anything for granted. Something was out there, something that could have turned that night into something unrecognizable. And I didn't want to find out what that something was. I'm a foreign male, and I was an Uber and Lyft driver for a couple of years while I studied at college. I was lucky enough to own a fairly new car with great gas mileage, so driving people around was no big deal. I always saw it as easy money. I've never been the most talkative guy, though, so I usually just say hello when passengers get in and leave out all the awkward small talk. Most of the customers I got were other college students who needed a ride back to the dorms or out to a house party or something. Due to my school schedule, I mostly worked between 6 p.m. and 2 a.m., depending on the day. This night, I had started at 8 p.m., driving around 10 to 15 customers before eventually picking up a guy around 11 p.m. The app showed his pickup location was on the side of a small neighborhood road. This wasn't unusual, but when I pulled up to his location, I didn't see him anywhere. It was dark, and the roads weren't very well lit. I pulled off to the side and put the car in park, looking around. All I could see was a gate up ahead, blocking off the neighborhood from regular traffic, so I couldn't go any further anyway. I decided to try calling the guy, not sure what else to do. But after a couple of rings, he declined the call. Almost a second later, though, the back door opens and a man gets in. I had no idea where he could have even come from, but I obviously assumed I must have just missed him somehow. "Hey, are you Tom?" I asked, making sure it was my customer. He replied quietly, "Yeah." I shifted into drive and made a 3-point turn to get out of the neighborhood. I wouldn't say I'm the most cautious Uber driver at night, but I definitely pay attention to avoid getting stuck in a bad situation. So occasionally, I glance in the mirror to see what my passengers are up to. Doing this, I noticed something was off about the man. He looked like a normal 30-year-old guy, but he almost seemed nervous. He was fidgeting with his hands and staring at the floor. It was pretty weird, and it gave me a bad feeling. He requested a 15-minute drive to a house just outside my college campus. About halfway through, things started getting much weirder. "How close are we?" he asked, his voice shaking slightly, as if he was nervous. "We're about 8 minutes away," I told him. A moment of silence passed before he leaned forward, partially between the front seats. "Is everything okay, sir?" I asked, trying to break the tension. He immediately leaned back in his seat, not responding. We made eye contact in the rearview mirror, but he quickly looked away and began fidgeting again. Obviously, I knew something was off, so I used this chance to check him out in the mirror. I tried to see if he had any weapons. There were no signs of anything big like a gun, but I wasn't confident whether or not he had a knife. I tried to stay calm, but my brain kept running through all of the horrible things that could happen to me very soon. We were just 4 minutes away when the man leaned forward again, asking me if I could pull over and drop him off right there. Looking around, the road was quiet. There were no cars nearby, which did not make me feel safe at all. "Are you sure? Your stop is just a couple minutes away," I said, trying to convince him to let me keep driving so I could get to a safer area. "No, drop me off here," he said firmly. "I need to get off here." I hesitated, but slowly pulled the car off to the side. I kept my foot on the brake, but I kept the car in drive, ready to move if something went wrong. "Have a good night," I said politely, hoping he'd just get out. Of course, though, he didn't move. There was a strange few seconds of total silence as neither of us moved or said anything. Then, suddenly, the man jolted forward, reaching for my phone. Without thinking, I slammed my whole body into his, causing him to drop the phone into the crack between the seats. We struggled, each of us trying to grab whatever we could. The car jolted forward as I tried to keep my foot on the brake, but it was hard to focus. My heart was pounding in my chest as I struggled to fight him off. The struggle lasted only about 20 seconds, but it felt like hours. Finally, the man leaned back, looked at me one last time, then ran out of my car and off the road. I immediately drove off, my hands shaking as I sped away. I called 911, breathless and trying to explain what had happened. Thankfully, they seemed to understand, and everything was wrapped up quickly. It turned out the guy had been using his friend's Uber account, and he was found pretty soon after. I feel really lucky to have gotten out of that unharmed. From what I know, he didn't even bring a weapon. He didn't have a history of violence or anything, so I guess that explains why he was so nervous and unprepared. It almost seemed like he didn't even want to do it. I still drive for Uber and Lyft, but I stopped doing really late drives. I'm definitely a lot more cautious about who I pick up now. This happened a couple of years ago. I'm a young female, and I had just turned 16 and gotten my driver's license. I didn't have my own car, but I was able to borrow my parents' car whenever they didn't need it. Gas was pretty cheap at the time, and driving was so new to me that I really enjoyed it. On weekends, I used to love driving around, grabbing food late at night, and just cruising through the town while listening to music. I think it felt so nice because I actually got to be alone, which wasn't very common when living with your parents. One weekend, I think it was a Saturday, I took my parents' car out. I drove through a 24-hour McDonald's to get a drink and a snack, then started driving around aimlessly. I didn't have a planned route. I just drove wherever I felt like. But for the most part, I tried to avoid areas where there would be a lot of other cars. There were a lot of back roads in my town that went between neighborhoods, but nobody ever really used them because the main roads were quicker. I turned down one of these roads, leading to a really nice neighborhood with expensive houses. Not long down the road, headlights flashed in my mirrors. I saw a car coming up behind me, and they were flashing their lights on and off. There were no other cars around, so they had to be signaling to me, but I didn't know why. This went on for a full minute, until the car behind me started speeding up and getting closer to the back of my car. I was still relatively new to driving and didn't know how to handle this, so I just kept driving, hoping I'd reach the neighborhood and maybe find a place to pull over in a less discreet area. But my plans were cut short. The car behind me backed off slightly, and then I heard their engine revving. They sped up and rammed into the back of my car. My car jerked forward, and I was stunned for a second, but it didn't seem to do any serious damage. There was a lot going through my mind at that point. I was scared and nervous about pulling over, but I also didn't want to bring my parents' car home damaged without even getting the other driver's insurance information. I pulled the car to the side and put it in park. The car behind me pulled off as well, parking really close to my bumper. They flashed their lights again. I didn't know whether to stay in my car or get out. I was in such an uncomfortable position, with no idea how to handle it. After a few seconds of hesitation, I opened my door and stepped out. Their windows were hard to see through, so I couldn't tell who was inside. I walked to the back of my car to try and see what the damage looked like, but they had parked so close that it was hard to get a good view. Then I heard their door open. I looked over and saw a man getting out, smiling with a friendly face and giving a polite wave as he walked toward me. I was expecting an angry man to start yelling at me or complaining that I had cut him off or something, but this was an odd surprise. "Sorry about your car," he said, still in a friendly manner. "I must have not been paying attention. It's all right. Can I just get your insurance info?" I asked, trying to stay calm. He looked away for a moment, then looked back at me. "Sure, it's right in my car," he said, pointing at the passenger door as if he wanted me to go over there. He just stayed where he was, looking at me like I was supposed to go. After a long, awkward pause, I told him I was just going to go home because the damage didn't seem so bad. Something didn't feel right, though. "Oh, you can't drive that home. It'll damage it more. Come with me. I'll give you a ride," he said, taking a few steps closer to me. His smiling face and friendly remarks were starting to feel really creepy. My car wasn't damaged enough to need a ride, and offering me one in this situation was just inappropriate. I said no and quickly started walking back to my car. But then the man grabbed my arm firmly and stopped me in my tracks. "Come on. The crash must have confused you," he said, starting to pull me back toward his car. Okay, I'll go with you," I said, trying to get him to let go of me. I didn't know what else to do. I followed him to his car, slowly walking toward the passenger side. As soon as he entered the driver's seat and shut his door, I sprinted back to my car. I heard him get out, but by then, I was already in my car, slamming the door and locking it before he could reach me. He pressed his body up against the window and stared at me for a second, then ran back to his car. I drove away as quickly as I could, my heart racing, and in my mirrors, I saw him make a 3-point turn and exit in the opposite direction. When I got home, I woke my dad up and told him what happened. He was furious. He told me I should never have stopped. He called the police, but the man was never identified. I'll never know what that man was trying to do or where he was going to take me. I just fear that someone else might not have been as lucky as I was.